Good morning. Welcome to our Bible study time at Southwest Park Baptist Church for Sunday, June the 28th. We're continuing in our study in Proverbs. This week our lesson's entitled The Choice. Our biblical truth, as our lesson writers have stated it, all people have a choice to make: follow God or reject Him. The fourth chapter in Proverbs has three sets of instructions from father to child or children. In the first 10 verses, the father encourages his children to listen to wisdom, quotes the teachings of his own father, and talks about the value of those and the blessings they will bring to the child's life. The second contrasts the two choices, the paths that people can take, either to follow wisdom or to reject a life of wisdom. And then the third is in verses 20 through 27. Some have called it the anatomy of wisdom, because he talks about the different parts of the person that are involved and how they're involved in a life of wisdom. If you're following along in your Sunday school material, the first 10 verses are not included in the focal passage, but they're good verses, so we want to take a quick look at them. So listen to what Solomon says in these first 10 verses. Hear, O sons, the instruction of a father. Give attention that you may gain understanding. For I give you sound teaching. Do not abandon my instruction. When I was a son to my father, tender and the only son in the sight of my mother, then he taught me and said to me, let your hearts hold fast my words. Keep my commandments and live. Acquire wisdom. Acquire understanding. Do not forget nor turn away from the words of my mouth. Do not forsake her, and she will guard you. Love her, and she will watch over you. The beginning of wisdom is acquire wisdom, and with all your acquiring, get understanding. Prize her, and she will exalt you. She will honor you if you embrace her. She will place on your head a garland of grace. She will present you with a crown of beauty. Hear, my son, and accept my sayings. And the years of your life will be many. So in the first two verses there, the father encourages the child to hear his instruction, give attention to them, make them a part of your life. And he says they're sound teaching, so don't abandon them. And so this kind of reinforces the tradition that the home is the first bastion of learning and the first place where the acquisition of wisdom begins. In verses 3 and 4, he recalls when he was a child and his father taught him. Then he taught me and said to me, let your heart hold fast my words. Keep my commandments and live. In the Jewish culture, traditionally, wisdom passed down from one generation to another generation was considered more authoritative. And so when he says to his child, keep my commandments and live, it's a reminder that receiving this wisdom wholeheartedly brings life. And you will live means experiencing life with all of its blessings, as opposed to the alternative there, a life of conflict and evil. People are in a life and death struggle. So choosing life means obeying commandments in order to enjoy God's bounty. Now we know some children don't like to hear Dad say, now back when I was a boy, but you might learn a lot if you do listen. And it's amazing how down through the years those words take on additional meaning, and you understand the value of them. Solomon says he learned wisdom from his father. Now he's passing it on to the next generation. And that's one of the primary ways that God has ordained his truth to be preserved and passed on from generation to generation. In verses 5 and 6, we see a second benefit of this wisdom, and that's security. He says, acquire wisdom, acquire understanding, don't forsake or turn away from it, and she will guard you. She will protect you. Love her and she will watch over you. So he kind of personifies love here as a godly woman that's to be embraced. And she has the qualities that can guard and protect life. So if those being instructed give their wholehearted devotion to her, she will watch over them and protect them. In verses 7 through 9, we see a third benefit, and that's honor. Prize her, and she will exalt you, Solomon says. She will honor you if you embrace her. So, wisdom is of supreme value. Embracing wisdom brings an honorable life, and a life that will bestow honor on the one who lives it. So that honor is essentially having to do with the character that wisdom produces. And that virtue, those qualities get recognized in the community, and so bring honor to the bearer. So the value of wisdom in these verses is portrayed as their life-giving, their security for the believer, and they bring honor and respect to the believer. In verses 11 through 13, Solomon speaks to the path that one's to take if they live a wise life. Let's read verses 11 through 13. I have directed you in the way of wisdom. I have led you in upright paths. When you walk, your steps will not be impeded, and if you run, you will not stumble. Take hold of instruction. Do not let go. Guard her, for she is your life. So wisdom here is portrayed as honest and righteous living. Staying on the right path demands listening carefully to wise instruction and following them precisely. So he says, Solomon says to his children, I have directed you in the way of wisdom. I've led you in upright. Some of your translations there will say, I've led you in straight paths. So, what does that mean? How would you describe a straight or upright path? Well, a straight path is one that's easy to follow. So wisdom is not deceptive. It's not obscure. It's not hard to understand. We just need to follow God's guidance to gain it. So, I have led you in a straight or upright path. Then he says, when you walk, your steps will not be impeded. If you run, you will not stumble. The Syriac version of the Old Testament reads, as thou goest step by step, I will open up the way before thee. There's two important principles contained in that verse. First of all, as you go step by step, and that emphasizes the truth that God does guard us and guide us step by step. He doesn't reveal the whole plan, our whole lives to us all at once, but he takes us step by step. Second thing, he says, I will open up the way before you. He guides people when they're moving toward him, moving forward for him. And as this particular translator or commentator says, a ship has to be in motion before the captain can steer it. A bicycle, when you're riding a bicycle, you can only guide it when you're moving. And so that's a good emphasis for us as believers. God guides us when we are in motion, when we're active for him. So when you walk, your steps will not be impeded. When you run, you won't stumble. In verse 13, he says, take hold of instruction. Do not let go. Guard her, for she is your life. It's important that we not just hear these instructions, but we take hold of them and that we grip them firmly. We don't let them go. We don't let them slip from us. And he says, guard her, for she is your life. So why is it important for us to protect or guard wisdom? Well, wisdom is of great value, and there's effort involved in obtaining it and maintaining it. Back in chapter 2, verse 4, if you seek her as silver, search for her as for hidden treasure. Then you will discern the fear of the Lord and discover the knowledge of God, for the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. So the picture there is of an intense effort to gain wisdom. So it has great value, and there's an effort required to obtain it. In chapter 3, verses 13 through 15, how blessed is the man who finds wisdom, and the man who gains understanding. For her profit is better than profit of silver, her gain better than fine gold. She's more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire compares with her. So, get wisdom. When you receive God's truth into your heart, God renews your mind and enables you to think wisely. That's part of that value of wisdom. It helps you to make right decisions and experience the guidance of God day to day. Warren Wiersbe says, God in his loving providence directs us and prepares the path for us. Augustine said, trust the past to the mercy of God, the present to his love, and the future to his providence. But King David said it better long before Augustine. You will show me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. Psalm 16:11. So, one of the dangers is that we let the lessons of wisdom slip through our fingers and we lose them. Take fast hold of instruction. Let her not go, is the way one translator translates this verse 13. Hold on to wisdom the way a little child holds a parent's hand and trusts the parent to guide and protect. God is able to keep us from stumbling if we'll keep ourselves in his wisdom. So in these verses we see the importance of taking the right path. In verses 14 through 19, Solomon turns his attention to the path that must be avoided, and we see the contrast here. Verses 14 through 19, do not enter the path of the wicked. Do not proceed in the way of evil men. Avoid it. Do not pass by it. Turn away from it and pass on. For they cannot sleep unless they do evil, and they are robbed of sleep unless they make someone stumble. For they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. But the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn that shines brighter and brighter until the full day. The way of the wicked is like darkness. They do not know over what they stumble. The way of wisdom is safe and peaceful and valuable. By contrast, the way of the wicked is dark and crooked. And Solomon says here in verse 14, don't enter the path. Don't even think about going that way. Back in chapter 2, verse 15, Solomon says, whose paths are crooked and who are devious in their ways, describing the path of the wicked. Down in verse 19, we saw the way of the wicked is like darkness. The first chapter of Psalms describes this lifestyle. Blessed is the man who does not walk in the advice of the wicked, nor does he stand in the way of sinners, nor does he sit in the assembly of mockers. Instead, in the law of the Lord is his delight, and on his law he meditates day and night. And so he's like a tree planted by streams of water that gives its fruit in season. Its leaf does not wither, therefore all that he does prospers. Not so the wicked. Instead, they're like the chaff that the wind scatters. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. So Solomon's advice here in 14, do not enter the path of the wicked. Don't proceed in the way of evil men. In verse 14, he adds emphasis to that. Avoid it. Do not pass by it. Turn away from it and pass on. So there's a note of urgent warning here in these kind of short staccato statements here. Avoid a life of sin. Don't pass by to investigate. Turn the other way. Keep going. It might seem interesting, intriguing, even thrilling, but it eventually will destroy you. That's from the Bible Believers commentary. The warning here is to avoid evil ways and evil men by not even starting down that wicked path. Don't take the first step here. And that's good advice. He says in verse 16, they cannot sleep unless they do evil. And they're robbed of sleep unless they make someone stumble. That's stark contrast to what Solomon described back in chapter 3, verse 24 that we looked at last week. You can go to bed without fear. You will lie down and sleep soundly. That's the way of wisdom. But here he says the wicked cannot even go to sleep before they commit evil. They're so intense, so occupied with evil that they can't rest unless they're engaged in evil doing. For they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. They feed on evil. Their source of strength and motivation is evil. They're captured, they're captivated by evil. Verse 18 says, the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn that shines brighter and brighter until the full day. The way of the wicked is like darkness. They do not know over what they stumble. So note the contrast there between the paths of the righteous and the wicked. The righteous follow a bright, illuminated path which allows them to see and proceed in safety and security and honor. Saw back in the first part of the chapter. In contrast, the wicked take a dark path which prevents them from seeing traps and obstacles along the way, and it causes them to stumble and fall. Warren Wiersbe says about these verses, God's children can't expect God's leading if they shuttle back and forth between the path of wisdom and the path of the wicked. Stay as far away from that path as you can. Don't enter it. Avoid it. Don't go near it. Go as far from it as you can. He says, certainly we have to witness to unsaved people whom the Lord brings to us, but we must never adopt their lifestyle or imitate their ways. God doesn't guide his children when they're walking in darkness. Think about that. God does not guide us when we're walking in darkness. He can't, because we're going our own way. When you're living in the will of God, the path gets brighter and brighter, not darker and darker. In 1 John 1, verse 5, John says, this is the message we heard from Jesus and now declare to you. God is light, and there is no darkness in him at all. So we are lying if we say we have fellowship with God, but go on living in spiritual darkness. We are not practicing the truth. But if we're living in the light, as God is in the light, then we have fellowship with each other, and the blood of Jesus, his Son, cleanses us from all sin. So, the contrast is stark here in these verses 14 through 19. Do not go the way of the wicked, but stay in the path of wisdom. Verses 20 through 27. The choice to make. My son, give attention to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. Do not let them depart from your sight. Keep them in the midst of your heart, for they are life to those who find them, and health to all their bodies. Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flows the springs of life. Put away from you a deceitful mouth, and put devious speech far from you. Let your eyes look directly ahead, and let your gaze be fixed straight in front of you. Watch the path of your feet, and all your ways will be established. Do not turn from the right nor to the left. Turn your foot from evil. In this third discourse here, Solomon uses several terms for parts of the body. He says the disciple must use ears to listen closely to the teacher's words, eyes to watch them closely, and the heart to determine to do them. By using ears, eyes, and heart, the teacher is exhorting the whole person to receive this wisdom. In verse 24, he mentions the mouth. In verses 26 and 27, he adds the feet. So some have described this as the anatomy of wisdom here. And it is it's a wonderful paragraph as a personal spiritual inventory to see if we're really living in obedience to the Lord, using all of our faculties in obedience to the Lord. So in verse 20, he says, give attention to my words and incline your ear to my saying. Why is it important to be careful what we hear? Whatever enters my ears will ultimately influence my mind, my heart, and my decisions. So I better be careful what I listen to. Paul warns us to beware of obscenity, foolish talk, coarse joking. And Psalms 1:1, which we just read, tells us to avoid ungodly counsel. When people speak, we must be able to identify God's voice and obey what he says. So what we hear is important. And he says, give attention to my words, incline your ear, be alert, and hear what I'm saying. In verse 21, he says, do not let them depart from your sight, and keep them in the midst of your heart, for their life to those who find them, and health to all their body. The words of wisdom, again, Solomon says, they provide life, a life of health. And the health that's promised here is both physical, emotional, and spiritual. The whole person. And that's the thrust of this whole passage right here. Wisdom's words are life-giving and creating. Jesus said in John 6:63, "The words that I speak to you are spirit, and they are life." And they are health to the whole body because they deliver a person from the sins and stresses that cause so much illness. So in verse 23, he follows that up by saying, "Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flows the springs of life." So, why would Solomon say that it's important to guard our hearts? One of the commentators here, the Believer's Bible Commentary, suggests that these verses are the Old Testament counterpart of Romans 12:1. They beseech us to present our entire beings to God: heart, mouth, lips, eyes, and feet. God begins with the inner man and works outward. The heart is first, and when he speaks of the heart, he's talking about the inner life, the mind, the thoughts here, the motives, the desires. The mind is the fountain from which the actions spring. If the fountain's pure, the stream that flows from it will be pure. As a man thinks, so is he. So this verse emphasizes the importance of a clean thought life. Warren Wiersbe says about this, "Guard your heart above anything else you have because it determines the kind of life you will live." The heart's the master control of the life. A wrong heart always produces a wrong life. To allow sin into the heart is to pollute the entire life. The Expositor's Commentary says, "First, the heart must be guarded diligently. The heart must be guarded, for it's the wellspring of life. The heart is the starting point of the activities of life. It determines the course of life." Do you see the common thread in all of those commentaries? The heart is the starting place, and what comes from the heart determines the course of the life there. So it's no wonder that Solomon would say, "Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flows the springs of life." Verse 24, he says, "Put away from you a deceitful mouth, and put devious speech far from you." The Hebrew phrase here that's used, that's just translated deceitful mouth, literally means falseness of mouth. And in Proverbs, the mouth frequently reflects a person's character. Righteousness will control the tongue and avoid crooked and twisted speech. The words flow from the heart, so this is the next logical step here. Wisdom produces truthful speech. Luke 6:45 says, "A good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart, and an evil person produces evil things from the treasury of an evil heart." What you say flows from what is in your heart. So again, we see the progression from the heart to the mouth, to the utterances there. So a guarded heart should result in guarded lips. Warren Wiersbe says, "A froward mouth is a proud mouth, a mouth that speaks scornfully and arrogantly." A Christian's words must always be spoken in love and seasoned with salt. Whatever is in the heart ultimately comes out of the mouth. Matthew 12, starting in verse 33, a tree is identified by its fruit. If a tree is good, its fruit will be good. If a tree is bad, its fruit will be bad. You brood of snakes, how could evil men like you speak what's good and right? For whatever is in your heart determines what you say. A good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart, and an evil person produces evil from the treasury of an evil heart. And I tell you this, you must give an account on Judgment Day for every idle word you speak. The words you say will either acquit you or condemn you. So, God's children must be careful to have sound speech that cannot be condemned, as Paul says in Titus 2:8. Speech that's gracious and seasoned with salt. Let your conversation be gracious and attractive so that you will have the right response for everyone. Colossians 4:6. A couple of these commentators have mentioned speech that's seasoned with salt. And we've heard the expression, take the words with a grain of salt. And I saw an explanation of that. The ancient Romans, they were big on oratory, so they listened to their orators, and they would look at each other, smile, and say, cum grano salis, take it with a grain of salt. That's where that expression comes from. Be skeptical. Christians are supposed to put the salt into their speech and keep their words pure and honest. Verse 25, he moves back to the eyes. Let your eyes look directly ahead. Let your gaze be fixed straight in front of you. So our eyes must be focused on proper goals. The wise person will have an unswerving directness, but the fool is easily distracted. Outlook determines outcome. Abraham was the friend of God because he walked by faith and looked for a city whose builder and maker is God. Hebrews 11:10. Lot became a friend of the world because he walked by sight and moved toward the wicked city of Sodom. Genesis 13:10 and 12. Everybody has some kind of vision before them that helps them to determine their values, actions, and plans. We would be wise to imitate David, who said, I will set no wicked thing before mine eyes. And the writer of Psalm 119, who prayed, turn my eyes away from worthless things. So let your eyes look directly ahead. Let your gaze be fixed on the right things. In verse 26, he says, watch the path of your feet, and all your ways will be established. Watch the path of your feet. How can we give careful thought to our paths? By avoiding things that might trip us up, the NIV Quest Study Bible says. This proverb suggests that we consider options carefully and make choices consistent with God's will. Psalm 26:12 says, now I stand on solid ground, and I will publicly praise the Lord. It's important that we watch the paths of our feet, watch where we step, how we step. As I was reading this, I thought back to when I was a kid. The farm I grew up on, if you walked about a half a mile in 3 different directions, you would get to the lake there. On the backside of our place, down over the cliff in the holler, the lake backed up where a creek ran into it. And it was a good place to fish, so I used to like to walk down there and go fishing occasionally. But I had to go down over that cliff, and there was a path, and it was pretty clearly pretty clearly defined path there, so it wasn't that hard to follow. But you did have to be careful, and as I would make my way down that path, there was one place where a tree had fallen, so you had to climb over that tree that had fallen. There were other places where there were some big rocks that you had to go around. And in all the times that I made that trip down that path down the cliff, I never once had a problem with that tree or those big rocks, those big obstacles, because they were very visible and clear. So you just did what you had to do to get over. There were also some places down that path where there were smaller little rocks that were not steady. They would turn if you weren't careful. More than once, on making my way, I've stepped on one of those rocks and it turned and I stumbled. Sometimes I fell. That's a pretty good metaphor for the way life is. We have to be careful of all of the circumstances. The big things, sometimes they're obvious. So we turn to God, we turn to His wisdom when we face those kind of things. But it's the little things sometimes that reach up and grab us and get us off the trail, or we stumble and fall. So watch the path of your feet, and your ways will be established. Your foot will be balanced. Verse 27, do not turn to the right nor to the left. Turn your foot from evil. All along the way, to the right and to the left, there are side streets and alleys that lead to the haunts of sin. Let's be true to Jesus, though 1,000 voices from the world may call to distract us. When tempted to go to a questionable place, ask yourself, would I like to be found there when Jesus comes back? Do not turn from the right or to the left. Turn your foot from evil. Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. Paul said, examine yourselves as to whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves, 2 Corinthians 13:5. We must always remember, the Lord is weighing our ways. Proverbs 5:21. For the Lord sees clearly what a man does, examining every path he takes. He's weighing our hearts. Proverbs 21:2. People may be right in their own eyes, but the Lord examines the heart. And He examines our actions. 1 Samuel 2:3. Stop acting so proud and haughty. Don't speak with such arrogance. For the Lord is a God who knows what you have done. He will judge your actions. When we're walking in the path of wisdom, God promises to protect our path, direct our path, and perfect our path. And we've seen all of those emphasized and demonstrated in this lesson today. It's a good reminder to all of us of the choices that we have to make and the importance of those choices. Come back next week and we'll take up with Proverbs chapter 5.